Hey dudes, it's Larold, and I'm going to talk about some of the problems with the Path of Exile 2 campaign. They've been a big source of frustration for the whole community, and I think that's pretty much it, right? That's the entire intro. So let's just kind of go ahead and get into things. So I do want to start with a very small build update that I have made to the Lightning Spear Amazon. I'm blasting tier 15s. I did get a perfect Jeweler's Orb. I still haven't seen a greater one yet, but I got a perfect, so I slapped in Execute onto my Lightning Spear and Fork as well at the recommendation of a really helpful comment. And so now my clear in maps looks like this. Hell yeah. So I haven't played around with row amount yet, but I am going to as soon as I'm done with this video. I actually got lucky in itself, found a Lycosa die, and it's really great. I did buy some Kitoko's Currents, and so I am not using Electrocute and Herald of Thunder anymore. That is what I was using to generate frenzy charges through Combat Frenzy before, but now just all of the lightning damage electrocutes. It's really easy to electrocute everything all the time, so that's kind of where we're at with the build. It's just even stronger now than it was before, and actually pretty safe because everything is effectively stunned all the time thanks to Electrocute. Alright, so what I really wanted to hit on was a pair of posts that GGG put out over the last couple of days that kind of addressed some of the issues with leveling with the campaign. And the first one really did so in a way that people were like not super happy about. So they kind of started out with some Huntress stuff, and they actually got this in faster than I thought they would. Coal the Weak, the new spear skill. I have played around with this. It is exactly like the Killing Palm skill, except it generates a frenzy charge. You know, you press a button, it dashes over, culls the enemy, generates a frenzy charge. And that's pretty cool. Like, it's good for frenzy charge generation early on in the character if you don't want to parry and you don't have access to combat frenzy yet. You can use behead support with it to steal rare mods, so that's kind of cool. Kind of the only real thing that I have seen. Like, I'm not using it. I don't feel like I need it, but you know, you could if you wanted to. Otherwise, there's just like a bug fix for a horrible economy exploit. They're banning everybody from that and removing all that currency from the economy. Great, that's fine. Bunch of bug fixes, nothing all that special in the patch here. But there was part of this first post in which they said many players are reporting that areas feel they're too large, and then essentially did kind of a non-apology apology, you know, the classic, I'm sorry that you got offended by that thing that I said, you know, when what you had said is something horrible, like go fall off a bridge or whatever. You know, they basically said like, we feel like there's not enough stuff in the areas, not they're too large. So with that being said, they did follow up here kind of at the end by saying like, we're going to check some outliers and see if there are changes to area size that need to happen. And now they have their follow-up post to that, in which that is kind of what they've done here. They have, I think, better than just simply shrinking down some of these zones in Act 3, they're removing the labyrinthine issues with a lot of these zones. So Drowned City and Utzal had like an area that was cut in order to make early access. You know, Drowned City and Utzal are the same zone, just, you know, separated by however many thousands of years, thanks to Alva's time portal. And, you know, I think this is very instructive, right? They had to temporarily cut this area to make early access. I think there's probably a lot of things where they have cut a corner, or cut a piece of content, or cut something that would make the rest of the pieces of the puzzle make sense. You know, but it's not in the game yet. They haven't finished it, and so like things seem wrong because of that. I definitely, I'm willing to give them the benefit out of the doubt on that. It certainly makes sense that they're just openly admitting it with this one zone, 2 zones. Then the Apex of Filth is probably the only one that they've said just explicitly, oh yeah, we need to make that area smaller. We're just gonna make it smaller. Great. You know, it's kind of like a toilet. It spirals down. Kind of makes sense that the Apex of Filth would be toilet-like. The Azak Bog is another one that has had like really insane variants on finding the boss. You know, you can just walk right in and walk right over to the boss, or you might have to spend like 20 minutes scouring the entire zone. So that's another one where they're going to make it a lot more uniform. And I really do think that's like a lot of the problem with a lot of these zones, is that they are labyrinth-like and not solved at all. So, you know, there could be this huge variance in the amount of time that you have to travel through a zone, and that's kind of something that they're like working on with most of the rest of these zones as well. Rather than really shrinking them down, they're making it easier to see where exits are. They're moving exits closer together in Chimeral Wetlands. They're kind of bottlenecking you directly toward the waypoint and infested barrens, which will cut down on a lot of the wandering back and forth that happens in that zone. Then in both of the Draconi zones, they're just making it so that there will be an extra soul core in each of those zones, so you spend less time searching around to find the thing that you need to get out of the zone. I wouldn't have minded if they'd added multiple extra soul cores, especially to the Sanctum. That one can, I think if you walked in and the soul cores were just on the ground, I actually think the Draconi Sanctum is one of the best zones in the campaign, but the problem is that's not how it works. You have to scour around for the soul cores, and they could be anywhere, and that winds up being pretty brutal. So this is like a half measure, I think, but overall, I think all of these are good changes, but there is one notable exception here, the Matlan waterways. So those were not nerfed, and I think, that is probably the zone that everyone looks at and says, well, it's too large. It's the worst offender of all the large zones in Act 3, and I'm inclined to agree. So just to kind of sanity test, I ran that zone in Act 3 on my current character, level 88 Amazon. I have 30% move speed on my boots. I have several move speed passive, so I'm like 32 or 34% move speed once you factor in armor and my shield penalties. Obviously, I'm one-shotting everything, so this wasn't like a real test of how long the run through that zone would take, of course. It's just a test of how quickly I can walk through it on a character that's at in-game in PoE 2. I also wasn't leap slamming or using any kind of techniques, right? I was just walking along. I did stop and kill the rare event monster. I think that was it. And my total time was right over 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes and 5 seconds. So then I did it again on a level 44 warrior that I played a bit in patch 0.1. I didn't finish a campaign on it, obviously. That character was solo self-found, but it was partly through Cruel Act 1. So it was definitely overgeared relative to the Matlan waterways in Act 3, which is a level 39 zone. And you can finish Act 3 below level 30 on a warrior pretty, well, I was going to say pretty easily, but no, the opposite. You could finish Act 3 on a warrior below level 30 with great difficulty, but it is doable. So that character only has 15% move speed on his boots, and it's using a two-handed mace, which I wrote down in my notes as a three-handed mace, apparently. I assume that's some sort of team building exercise weapon or something. So I was leap slamming the whole way on that character. I did kill about half the monsters, something like that. They mostly died in one or two hits with Mace Strike or Supercharged Slam, which is very slow and not the most representative sample. But again, whatever. Going from the start of the area to pulling the final lever took me about 5 minutes and 40 seconds. So really not that big of a difference from a fully geared out character to sort of a level appropriate character, despite the massive difference in levels of character power and move speed on boots. The big differentiator really is that one character had leap slam, and that winds up making a world of difference. It covers up a lot of sins. So just to do a comparison with PoE 1, I also ran through Solaris Temple 1 and 2 on my Whisperer and Freesia League. That character has 47% move speed from boots. I full explored both zones in Act 8. I didn't kill anything along the way. I didn't use a Quicksilver Flask. But I was definitely zooming, and it took me 3 minutes and 45 seconds to completely traverse those two zones. I also wasn't using Flame Dash either. I probably could have shaved another 45 seconds off. So yeah, the difference in move speed is pretty substantial between the two games. This is kind of, I think, a piece of friction for people who have experience with PoE 1 who are now playing PoE 2, and it's definitely a bitter pill to swallow. So that really brings me to the big question here. Is the PoE 2 campaign too long? Yes, but I don't really think it is for the reason that people think. Is it really that much longer than the PoE 1 campaign? I went through and compared the number of zones per act in PoE 1 versus the number of zones per act in PoE 2. PoE 1 acts have on average about 13 to 15 zones. PoE 2 acts 1, 2, and 3 have 14, 17, and 16 zones respectively. We don't know what acts 4 and 6 are going to have, but if they keep that average, I would expect they're probably going to be closer in size to Act 1, a little on the smaller side compared to Acts 2 and 3, but I don't know. So if that average holds up, we would expect to traverse through around 95 zones in order to complete the PoE 2 campaign, somewhere between 90 and 100. This is about 25 to 30 zones fewer than there are in the PoE 1 campaign. And just to nail that average down from before on the warrior in the waterways, since that is the zone that they didn't nerf, to me that indicates that they think it's fine. If the campaign is based on clearing 90 to 95 zones at an average of 5 to 6 minutes per zone, that's about 8 to 10 hours. That sounds pretty great for PoE 2's campaign. I don't think it's accurate at all, but if 8 to 10 hours were the target time for a reasonably quick player who's not like Mr. Speedrunner, I think that would be pretty good. In terms of zone size, doing a lot of side-by-side comparison, just walking around and looking at them, while they obviously vary a lot, I actually don't think zones in PoE 2 are significantly larger in size than a lot of the zones in PoE 1. Lunaris Temple 2 in PoE 1, for example, is so much larger than any zone in PoE 2. It's not close. I think the difference is that, for one, PoE 1's layouts are solved and PoE 2's are not. There are a lot of campaign areas in PoE 2, like the Apex of Filth and the Azak Bog, that are deliberately labyrinthine that probably need to be nerfed, and in both of those cases are being nerfed. Player move speed is a lot higher in PoE 1 than it is in PoE 2, and I think most importantly, player damage is much higher in PoE 1 by the time you're at the relevant zone than it is in PoE 2. So you move through PoE 1 zones more quickly due to having more move speed on boots, movement skills, multiple Quicksilver flasks, and not stopping to hit each white monster 6 times before it dies, and you're not guessing where you're going while you're doing that. I think the real problem with PoE 2's campaign is that player power is so much lower relative to monsters throughout the campaign than it was in PoE 1, and I feel there are 4 overlapping design decisions that have caused player power to be so low. I think some aspect of this needs to change. First off, there is no crafting bench, there is no vendor system, and that means there's really no chance to catch up bad pieces of gear early. Gambling is a pretty good idea, but the costs on it are way too high, and the variance is, it's not really, it's not in your favor. It might literally be. I mean, I don't know how it's designed, but it certainly doesn't feel in your favor given the exorbitant cost and also the limitation of having to kill unique enemies in order to even get more gamble slots. Just really makes it difficult to actually gamble for anything to catch up your gear. It certainly is a funny thing to say, I'm gonna gamble to fix what I could normally have just fixed with a crafting bench. So I talked about this in my league start. I was using a level 16 spear from the start of Act 2 until the end of Act 3. I was level 46 when I replaced that level 16 spear. That's 30 levels, 30 years, that's absurd. And if I could have just bench crafted flat fizz or percent fizz onto some other spear that I'd found along the way, that would have fixed my issue. The second issue is the reduction of primary stats in the passive tree. So this was initially announced as like a really nice quality of life feature, the ability to choose your small passive stat bonuses along the way. They're choose your own adventure style instead of just being like, this class is a dex class, so all of the small passives around it are dex. This one's an int one, so all of these are int. The problem is that they only give 5 stat per point instead of the 10 that you used to get in PoE 1. This is compounded by the third design decision, which is that stat requirements in PoE 2 are much higher than they are in PoE 1. I can look at a level 19 Herald of Thunder here. It requires 191 dex. The highest requirements you get for basically anything in PoE 1 is like 155 or 157 of a given primary stat. This means that being able to actually equip new gear and upgrade your skill gems throughout the campaign is a lot harder to manage due to that increased emphasis on primary stats. This would be fixable if you could just get more strength or dexterity or int from the tree, but that means sacrificing points that you should spend on damage bonuses, which completely defeats the point. This would also be fixable by just crafting stats onto your gear as a stopgap, but there's no crafting bench. And then the fourth design decision, really the thing that is causing all of these problems, is item scarcity. That's it, monsters just don't drop loot, they don't drop currency, they mostly just drop nothing. The lack of a crafting bench and the stat requirements would be a lot easier to deal with if monsters earlier on in the campaign were dropping more crafting currency and more rare items, but they don't. Bosses and rares dropping guaranteed rare items or currency items would absolutely change the campaign experience for players for the better. It would put a thumb on the scale in the player's favor, right? That is, I think, what people are asking for. Just to give my experience again, I saw 5 or 6 Exalts and Regals in my entire run through both difficulties of the campaign. That is 6 mods but they're not crafted. I got to choose the mod I want. It's 6 random mods, you know? It's I slam an Exalt on my weapon and it gives me 60% increased stun buildup. It gives me 2 life per enemy killed. Cool. And I stopped and killed random rares along the way. I killed a lot of optional bosses. At one point in Act 4, I stopped and I killed the living bramble in the Grellwood like 5 times in a row. I never got any rare items from him. I don't know why I wasted my time doing it. You know, I didn't get any exalts, like you already know it. I didn't get anything from it. That seems like a huge oversight. This is all very frustrating to me because on a second character, once I have a bunch of currency ready to quickly slam together upgrades for my character along the progression path, I really like the campaign. I know that's not a Reddit approved thing to say, but I actually don't think PoE 2's campaign sucks. I think it's a lot better than the PoE 1 campaign on a decently geared character. But that's the issue. It absolutely feels tuned around the assumption that you're going to have 5 or 6 mod items that are decently well rolled in pretty much every slot from around the time you're like near the end of Act 2. Once you get to the Dreadnought, you basically need to have pretty good level appropriate gear. And there's literally no way to accomplish that on a League start character, so you wind up auto-attacking white monsters for 5 minutes at a time, or dying 15 times trying to get through the Dreadnought, and then you go complain about how much the campaign sucks on Reddit, which is totally understandable. I do think there is one other issue. I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating here. Leap Slam and Shield Charge. Maces have good movement skills, and the lack of good movement skills for everyone else is a real issue. I did like Rake on the Huntress, the Huntress, like, I mean, whatever, spears, right? But I liked Rake. It didn't really do a lot of damage, but it was pretty cool to like be able to snap around to enemies very quickly. That actually did feel decent, but not nearly as good for actually moving through the campaign as Leap Slam and Shield Charge. It was kind of a half measure. It generally just feels not very good to not play a mace in the campaign. It feels bad to be shoehorned into offhanding a mace for movement if you really just want to play with bows or crossbows or be a caster or something. I don't want to get maces nerfed, I really don't. I really don't. I just want more movement options like Leap Slam, or for skill and weapon exclusivity to be removed so you can Leap Slam with a spear. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I also don't expect any more movement skills until we get swords and daggers added into the game, and that might be another 6 months. So maces is all we have for now. It is a beta after all. That is the thing I keep having to remind myself of throughout all of this anytime I feel negative. And for what it's worth, just to close on a positive note, I have not felt negatively about the game in the last 2 days. The endgame is absolutely bussin'. I am having a really good time in maps. I don't want to be nerfed in maps. Maybe it's because of how hard the campaign was, but the lack of struggle in maps really caught me by surprise in a good way. It was really smooth and fun to just ramp from tier 1s all the way to tier 15, blasting like very, very smoothly. It felt great. I just want to have that same experience throughout the campaign. I want it to be more consistent. I want to feel the continued progression of my character's gear throughout the campaign instead of, I got this gear in Act 1 on the equivalent of Twilight Strand, and now I'm killing Jamun-Ra, and I am still literally wearing it. That is not great. I think having more ways to cover up bad luck on gear like a crafting bench, or a vendor recipe system, or maybe just 1/10 the price on gambling gear, something like that would be the way to fix it. Runes are a neat system, but they are not getting the job done in the campaign, and I don't think the solution to runes is to add another 10 types of them. I don't think these fixes are all that GGG is going to do to the campaign, and I do think that this is just the first taste. I hope so, because I don't think they're quite enough, but they are a really good start to fixing Act 3, which really did have the worst. I've said labyrinthine like 15 times now, but whatever. They're fixing the labyrinthine zones. That has to be the top priority in terms of zone redesign. Increasing low-level player power also needs to happen. I think base move speed is something I would love to see, but it feels a bit like a pipe dream. I don't know. It needs some kind of increase too, but that is definitely a different department from level design. So we're just gonna kind of have to see on that front. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, and let me encourage you to get to maps on a Lightning Spear Amazon. I assure you, it is worth it. Bye.